Welcome to Sticky Med, learning medicine, stick by stick.
If you've ever, really thought about the sheer complexity of life, it all starts with that blueprint, DNA.
That's right.
So we're looking at the architecture and the control panel. Right, let's start with that physical problem. That massive amount of data in such a tiny space, it's all about extreme condensation. Chromatin.
And that involves these specialized proteins, histones. They act kind of like spools for thread.
Spools, okay.
The basic unit is called the nucleosome. That's what gives you that beads on a string look people talk about. So to make just one of those beads, the DNA molecule actually wraps around a core of 8 histone proteins, a histone octamer, almost exactly twice.
Twice around. Okay, but that sounds like it might just slip off. How does it hold together so tightly? What's the physics behind that?
Well, it's actually pretty fundamental. It comes down to basic electrical attraction.
Okay.
See, the DNA backbone, with all its phosphate groups, carries a strong negative charge.
Right.
And the histones, they're these large proteins that are just loaded with positively charged amino acids. Lysine and arginine are the key ones.
Ah, so positive meets negative.
Exactly. That powerful charge difference creates this, stickiness. It makes the DNA grip that histone core really tightly.
So it's essentially held together by, molecular static cling. That's quite efficient.
It is very efficient.
But, okay, the nucleosome is the bead. How do you stabilize the whole string? The entire chromatin fiber needs to be held together, right?
That's where the 5th type of histone comes in, H1. H1 is more like a clip or an anchor. It doesn't sit in the core that the DNA wraps around.
Right.
Instead, it binds both to the nucleosome unit itself and to what we call the linker DNA.
Linker DNA. That's the bit of string between the beads.
Precisely. H1 sort of cinches things together. It pulls those nucleosomes closer, helping to form that next level of structure, the 30-nanometer fiber. It's absolutely key for that higher order compaction.
So H1 is like the master stabilizer for the whole compact structure. Got it. Now, thinking about timing, when does the cell actually make these building blocks, the DNA and the histones?
Well, the sources point out this is highly coordinated. It happens together.
Okay.
Both the copying of the DNA replication and the synthesis of new histone proteins occurred during the S phase of the cell cycle.
S phase, synthesis phase, makes sense.
Yeah, it ensures that as soon as new DNA is made, the packaging material, the histones, are right there ready to wrap it up properly.
Very neat. And before we move on from structure, we should touch on that exception mentioned in the material, mitochondrial DNA.
Yes, that's a really fascinating evolutionary aside. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, they have their own separate DNA.
Right, totally separate.
And it's circular, more like bacterial DNA. And importantly, it doesn't use histones for packaging.
No histones at all.
None. It's a much simpler, you could say more primitive, packaging system. It really highlights its different evolutionary origin compared to the nuclear DNA.
Okay, so we've got the structure down, this incredibly dense packing. But now, how does the cell actually use this library? How does it make sure only the right genes are accessible?
Yeah, how do you read a book that's so tightly packed away?
Exactly. It must need a way to distinguish between the parts that are open for business and the parts that are locked down.
And that's precisely the difference between the two main states of chromatin we can actually see under an electron microscope. Heterochromatin and Euchromatin.
Okay, 2 types. Let's start with heterochromatin. Sounds dense.
It means different chromatin. This is the most condensed form. It looks much darker on those EM images.
Darker, okay.
And the key thing is, functionally, it's sterically inaccessible.
Sterically inaccessible, meaning physically blocked.
Exactly. Physically blocked. Transcription machinery, enzymes, none of it can get in there to read the DNA sequence, so it's transcriptionally inactive. Silent.
Like deep storage.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Permanent deep storage for genes that aren't needed in that cell type, or maybe ever.
And the sources mentioned we can sometimes actually see an example of this.
Absolutely. Barr bodies are a classic example.
Barr bodies. The inactive X chromosome in female cells.
That's the one. You can often see it as this dense little clump near the edge of the nucleus. It's a whole chromosome that's been condensed down into heterochromatin, essentially shut off.
Wow. Okay, so that's the lockdown stuff. What about the genes that are being used?
That brings us to Euchromatin, the true chromatin.
True chromatin sounds more open.
It is. It's much less condensed, so it appears lighter on the electron micrographs.
Lighter. Okay, makes sense.
And because it's less condensed, it's sterically accessible. The machinery can get in.
So it's active.
Transcriptionally active, yes. Ready to be expressed, ready to make proteins. The basic idea is pretty simple. If the cell needs a gene, that region of the chromosome needs to be in the Euchromatin state, unwound and available. Which brings us to, well, a really crucial question. We see these physical states, condensed and open. But how does the cell switch between them? How does it control this dynamically?
Right, it can't be static.
And this is where it gets really fascinating, because the cell can reversibly change which genes are expressed without changing the actual DNA sequence at all. That's the heart of epigenetics, these chemical control switches.
Epigenetics, above the genome. Okay, the material highlights two main chemical modifications here: methylation and acetylation. Let's tackle DNA methylation first, the silencer.
Yeah, methylation often acts as a silencer. It involves adding a small chemical tag, a methyl group, directly onto the DNA molecule itself.
Onto the DNA, not the histones this time.
Correct. Usually this happens in the promoter region of a gene, especially in areas called CPG islands, which are just stretches rich in C and G bases.
CPG islands, okay.
And when those CPG islands in a promoter get methylated, the gene is typically turned off, silenced. There's a mnemonic for it. CPG methylation makes DNA mute.
Mute, okay. And this isn't just small-scale stuff, is it? The sources link it to really big processes.
Oh, absolutely. It's involved in huge regulatory events. Things like genomic imprinting, deciding whether you use the copy of a gene from your mother or your father.
Right.
And also X-chromosome inactivation, which we mentioned with Barr bodies, that's heavily driven by methylation. It's also implicated in aging, cancer development, and even keeping jumping genes, transposons, quiet.
So it's a major control mechanism. And when it goes wrong,
Then you can get serious problems. The sources bring up Fragile X syndrome as a key example.
Fragile X, that's the most common inherited form of intellectual disability, right?
It is. And it turns out it's caused by excessive methylation, hypermethylation of the promoter for a gene called FMR1.
Too much methylation.
Way too much. It completely shuts down the FMR1 gene, silences it inappropriately, and the lack of that gene's protein leads to the symptoms of the syndrome.
That's a really clear link between an epigenetic mark and a disease.
Okay.
So methylation is a powerful off switch, often quite stable, but cells need quick, reversible on switches too.
Exactly. Things need to adapt.
Which brings us to the other major player, histone acetylation, the activator.
Acetylation is, well, it's quite elegant, actually. It targets the histone proteins, the spools, not the DNA itself.
Back to the histones, okay.
Remember that strong positive charge on the histones that helps them grip the negative DNA?
Yeah, the lysine and arginine.
Acetylation works by adding an acetyl group to those positively charged lysine residues, specifically on the histone tails, little bits of the protein that stick out.
Adding an acetyl group, what does that do to the charge?
It neutralizes it. It removes the positive charge.
Ah, so it weakens the grip.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You weaken that electrostatic attraction between the histone and the DNA. The grip loosens, the DNA coiling relaxes, and the chromatin physically opens up,
Making it accessible again.
making it accessible, which leads to increased transcription. So the other mnemonic is histone acetylation makes DNA active.
Active. Okay, that makes sense. It's like loosening the knot. And the beauty here is that it's potentially much faster, right? Just tweaking a chemical bond on the histone rather than modifying the DNA sequence.
Much faster, much more dynamic. It allows the cell to respond quickly to signals.
And we see this in action in things like hormone regulation.
Yes, the sources mention thyroid hormone as an example.
Yeah.
The synthesis and response pathways are tuned in part by changing the acetylation status of the thyroid hormone receptor complex.
So acetylation helps control whether genes related to metabolism get turned on or off by the hormone.
That's the idea. It fine-tunes the response.
Okay, now let's connect these. We have methylation silencing DNA, acetylation activating it via histones. How do these systems, talk to each other? Specifically, how does that mute signal from DNA methylation connect to tightening things up structurally?
Yeah.
That involves decetylation, right?
Exactly. Histone decetylation. It's the reverse of acetylation. And yes, there's often a link.
How does that work?
Well, when a region of DNA gets methylated, that methylation mark can act like a signal beacon. It can attract specific protein complexes to that spot.
Okay, recruiting proteins.
And some of those recruited proteins are enzymes called histone deacetylases, or HDACs.
Ah, the deacetylases. They remove the acetyl groups.
Precisely. So the DNA methylation happens first. It recruits the HDACs, and then the HDACs remove the activating acetyl groups from the nearby histones,
So the DNA mute signal triggers the removal of the histone active signal.
leading to the tightening up of the chromatin structure again. The DNA coiling gets tighter, access is reduced, and transcription goes down. It's a way the silencing signal gets reinforced structurally, deactivating the DNA region.
A cascade effect. Very clever. But like acetylation, problems with decetylation are linked to disease, too.
Yes, they are. The sources mention Huntington disease.
Huntington's, the neurodegenerative disorder.
There's evidence suggesting that dysregulation of histone deacetylation, maybe too much activity or activity in the wrong places, might contribute to the altered gene expression patterns seen in Huntington's, potentially worsening the disease process.
So messing with the tightening mechanism is also bad news. Okay, one more chemical tag to cover. Histone methylation. This one sounds a bit more complicated.
It can be, yeah. Unlike acetylation, which is pretty consistently an on signal, the effect of histone methylation really depends on where it happens.
Location, location.
Pretty much. Which specific amino acid on the histone tail gets the methyl group? It could be lysine or arginine, and even how many methyl groups are added.
So it's not a simple on-off switch.
Not always. Generally speaking, histone methylation often leads to transcriptional suppression. It mostly makes DNA mute, similar to DNA methylation.
Mostly mute.
But, and this is the nuance, certain methylation marks at specific locations can actually signal for activation instead. It acts as a more complex signal flag that other proteins read to interpret whether to open or close that chromatin region.
So let's pull this all together. What does it all mean?
We've really moved beyond thinking of genetics as just a static string of letters.
Definitely.
It's clearly this incredibly dynamic system, like a complex switchboard, managed by all these chemical tags. The structure, the difference between that tight heterochromatin and the open euchromatin sets the stage. It dictates what's even potentially readable.
Right. Accessibility is key.
But then it's these chemical modifications, DNA methylation, histone acetylation, deacetylation methylation, that provide the really fine-tuned control.
That's the synthesis, isn't it? These epigenetic marks orchestrate everything from normal development and cell function to, unfortunately, disease states like Fragile X or Huntington's when they go wrong.
And all of this happens without changing a single base pair in the underlying DNA code itself.
Yeah.
It's a whole layer of control sitting on top of the genome.
It really is the ultimate regulatory overlay.
It's truly amazing, the complexity and elegance of it. And this leads to a final thought.
We talked about how histone decetylation is implicated in Huntington's pathology and how hypermethylation shuts down the crucial gene in Fragile X syndrome. So think about this. What if future therapies didn't aim to fix the gene sequence itself, which is incredibly hard?
Right, gene editing is complex.
What if instead they targeted these epigenetic switches? Imagine drugs, maybe small molecules, designed to specifically inhibit those deacetylases in Huntington's, or perhaps to carefully reverse the methylation, silencing the FMR1 gene in Fragile X.
Reactivating the gene without changing the DNA.
Exactly. Could targeting these dynamic chemical controls offer a whole new way to treat complex genetic diseases regulating expression instead of rewriting the code? Something to think about.